Hello, my name's Rhodes Yepsen, and I'm Executive Director of the Biodegradable Products Institute. I'm going to talk to you today about compostable packaging in the pet industry. First, I'll talk a little bit about who BPI is, the organization that I work with. Then I'll talk about connections, compostable packaging, organic waste, and composting infrastructure. I'll look at requirements for certification, like eligibility and technical requirements. We'll talk about a couple pet industry products and packaging examples, and then some things that we're doing to expand opportunities and awareness. So first, who is BPI? The Biodegradable Products Institute is a nonprofit that was formed back in 1999 to promote the production, use, and appropriate end of life for compostable materials. We focus a lot on certification, which is really the production side of compostable products and packaging. Then we have education, where we're driving awareness of how those products are used in systems for composting. And then we have advocacy, where we're working on expanding opportunities for diversion of compostable products and associated materials. So a good place to start is the connections between packaging, organic waste, and compost infrastructure. BPI is focusing on this intersection between food scraps diversion and sustainable packaging. In this way, compostable packaging becomes a driver for something bigger than just a replacement for non-recyclable plastic. It becomes a driver for climate resilience and regenerative agriculture. In this way, we talk about how we're turning packaging into a climate change solution. Looking at the UN reports around food waste and loss, if food waste were its own country, it would be the third largest greenhouse gas emitter in the world after the US and China. This is a big impact. And it's no wonder when we look at the amount of materials going to our landfills in the US, where food consistently is the top material being landfilled. And combining the food with wood and yard trimmings, all readily compostable material, it's closer to 40% of what's going to landfills. That's even before we start getting into packaging redesign to be diverted with those compostable materials. There are quite a few composting facilities in the United States, around 4,700 facilities, but the majority of these accept yard trimmings only. This was driven by a lot of bans on landfilling yard trimmings in the 80s and 90s, and food waste composting has only really taken off in the past decade or so. It grows every year, but still roughly only 10% of composting facilities are accepting food scraps. That's part of the access equation, the number of facilities, kind of like looking at the number of MRFs for recycling. The other component of access is the number of households who have the ability to divert food scraps and associated packaging, either in a curbside collection program or a drop-off program. Biocycle magazine recently came out with an updated report looking at the number of programs, and it's around 10 million households that have access to either curbside or drop-off collection offered by their municipality. There are even more programs that are private subscription services that are popping up to fill in the gaps. But the official municipal number is around 10 million households, which has gone up quite a bit over the past few years, from 6,700 households back in 2017. So this number grows every year, but it's still not a big portion of our population. One of the resources that we've been investing in to improve this transparency in data is findacomposter.com. This is a website that historically has had a lot of facility information, and we're working on updating the facility listings. And later this year, we'll also be entering in those residential access numbers so that we can really get a better picture of not just where the facilities are, but where the communities are that are offering food scraps collection or drop-off programs. So why is this so important? Why am I talking about food scraps, composting at a pet sustainability conference? Well, when we're thinking about the circular economy, there are sort of two different circular loops. And a lot of time when we're looking at packaging, we're thinking of the blue loop here, which is the mechanical or technical loop. And when we start thinking about composting and compostable packaging, we're looking at the green loop, the biological loop. And there are some similarities to conventional recycling, but in many ways it's quite different. And what we really want to do is make sure that we're designing products and packaging that fit into the system in which it will be collected and processed. And so looking at plastics packaging today, you can see here that it's a pretty bleak picture, right? 98% of plastic packaging is coming from virgin feedstock. There's a lot of it being landfilled, some of it being leaked into the environment, being burnt for energy recovery, and that what's actually getting recycled and turned back into new packaging is actually a really small portion. So again, this is primarily when you're looking at that blue mechanical loop side of the circular economy. As we start looking at what the fix is for this problem in the circular economy, you can see that, again, a lot of what we're talking about for plastic packaging is still in that mechanical loop. Yes, there is some renewable sourced material coming in for the virgin feedstocks rather than finite resources from fossil sources. But a lot of it is still talking about reuse, recycling, all sort of that mechanical technical loop. And it's only the red circle here for AD and composting. You can see it's a small portion of packaging that we're talking about pushing into this biological loop. And that's things that are associated with feedstocks that composters can accept and process, such as food scraps, yard trimmings, and woody materials. This all sort of sets the stage for BPI certification, and the eligibility requirements that we have. Before we jump into that, I think it's good to level set and talk about a couple terms. I think one of the very common misconceptions is that biodegradable is the same thing as compostable. They're related, so people aren't totally wrong, but biodegradability needs to be defined by an environment and time frame such as commercial scale compostability. The ASTM standards D6400 and D6868, the standards that BPI certifies to, set these criteria for North America for compostability. Several states have gone as far as banning the term biodegradable as a marketing word, such as California, Maryland, and Washington, and Minnesota for bags. And this is really driven at the fact of trying not to confuse consumers into thinking that something that is biodegradable in other environments can also be composted, which would become contamination at a composting facility, or that people, if they see that word, might think that it's okay if the item gets littered on the side of the road or in the ocean. So the proper terminology when we're discussing products and packaging composted with food scraps and other organic materials is certified compostable. For the requirements for BPI certification, we have sort of two general brackets. We have the technical requirements, the testing, which are the tests needed to pass and be technically compostable. And then we have the eligibility criteria for our certification, which is really getting the item composted in practice. So first, let's start with the technical requirements, the ASTM standards. These are pass-fail specifications, so they're not specific tests. The specifications indicate what tests to do. We have sort of three general categories of tests. The first is biodegradation in a composting environment. And so this is looking at the polymers used in a compostable package and determining whether the microbes in the compost can utilize the organic carbon in that plastic as food. So we determine that by how much of that organic carbon is converted into CO2. Then we have disintegration on the final package. That's whether the item is physically, visually breaking down in a composting practice. And then no adverse impacts. So things like plant toxicity or heavy metals tests to make sure that the resulting compost is still just as good as compost produced without compostable packaging. So we have a long certification scheme on our website if you want to know more about those technical requirements or try to think about your packaging or products and what tests would be required. And our certification scheme goes into great detail about how these standards are used in our certification. So that's sort of the technical aspect of, is your item technically compostable? On the eligibility side, we've built in other criteria to improve acceptance of compostable packaging into food scraps programs. Kind of notably, we banned fluorinated chemicals back in 2016, gave a window for that phase out through January 1, 2020. So this is a ban on all intentionally added fluorinated chemicals. We do this with a total fluorine test. We look at safety data sheets, and we require the manufacturer to submit a statement of no intentionally added PFAS. Eligibility criteria, we'll dig into this a little bit more, but really, this is making sure that the item fits into that biological loop in the circular economy. And then the use of the certification mark, it's very critical that the item is easily identifiable as compostable. So let's dig into the eligibility for BPI certification a little bit. The item must be associated with desirable organics in the waste stream, such as food scraps and yard trimmings that are collected for composting. Again, so when we're thinking about moving beyond the technical requirement of being compostable, we want to make sure that it's designed to go into that biological loop rather than into the mechanical loop. And so if the primary materials out of the waste stream that composters are diverting are able to turn into compost, our food scraps and yard trimmings, we need to make sure that the items are associated with that and help facilitate that diversion and aren't coming out of left field. They also can't be a redesign of something that's a better fit for recycling. This obviously changes depending on from year to year or where you're located, but we are doing our best to make sure that we're not competing with something that has wide recyclability, such as a water bottle. The item also can't require disassembly in order to be composted. This is to avoid consumer confusion and contamination at a composting facility. And here you can see a few examples of items that we are certify quite often. The item also has to be labeled and identified. A lot of effort goes into designing compostable packaging, doing all of the tests, making sure it's fits within the food scraps composting system. But if it's not labeled and people can't tell that it's compostable, it's probably not going to end up in the right bin. And it could be a contaminant in the recycling bin or just end up in the trash and not get the value of getting composted. We have a lot of documents on our website, like our certification mark usage requirements document that outline how you can label a product. We show our certification mark in different formats, from a package like the center, where you can use the full lockup, full disclaimer required by the Federal Trade Commission. The cup on the left shows that maybe you need to stretch that out in more of a horizontal format. Even a really small format item like a compostable coffee pod, it can be kind of broken out and printed around the ring. So how does this all fit within the pet industry and packaging and products? I've been talking a lot about materials that composters accept. And so I have two examples, one that does not fit so well today based on the materials that composters are accepting, and some that should work pretty well. The first are pet waste bags. So today, BPI is only certifying pet waste bags for Canada, not for the US. That's because pet waste itself is not currently accepted in the majority of US curbside residential composting programs. So if the pet waste itself is not accepted, the associated bags to collect pet waste are also not acceptable in those composting programs. So we will not certify those for the US market today. We will in Canada, where pet waste is encouraged in the composting stream, and they would like it bagged for sanitary reasons. So we certify pet waste bags for the Canadian marketplace. To make that clear, we require that companies put certified for use in Canada on the packaging or product, just to make that clear, again, making that distinction for consumers so they're not confused about whether they can or cannot compost that item. And we do consider exemptions, right? These rules are intended as best practices, and we have granted some exemptions. There are, for instance, some private collection programs or dog parks where they are successfully collecting the bags that they provide there and composting that in a private setting. So, we're willing to work with companies if they do have situations like that. On the other side, pet food itself is something that is commonly accepted in composting programs. The pet food is similar to human food, right? And so the composting programs often, so whether that's explicit that they're accepting pet food or not, the associated packaging, it should be eligible for BPI certification because the contents of that package are accepted for composting. Of course, the package must still meet the technical requirements, those ASTM standards. It shouldn't be a redesign of something that's a readily recyclable package, and it can't require disassembly in order to be composted, and it must be clearly labeled. So we do see a good fit here in the sustainable pet industry for pet food. Because that food is associated with composting, the packaging should be as well. So what are we doing to expand opportunities and awareness around these topics? A lot of this in the last year or so has been focused around a composter alignment workshop that BPI and Biocycle put on last year. And it was really intent on trying to figure out what can we do to align stakeholders across the value chain on a single set of acceptability criteria for compostable products and packaging. So we have all these rules around labeling or eligibility, but there are still issues sometimes with getting items composted. And so we wanted to make sure that from across the value chain, we were all speaking the same language and we were agreeing what the barriers were, what the future state is. So in other words, what does success look like? And what are some projects that can get us there? So you can see sort of in a classic workshop format, we started with some surveys, workshop sessions. We thought there were going to be 1 or 2 barriers. As we brainstormed, this broke out into 6 different barriers. We worked through future states and projects, and then we sort of coalesced at the end into a report focused on solutions that could get us to this acceptability criteria. I encourage you to check this out on our website. There's a lot of information there. And really what we started to do over the last year or so is work our way down this project list. So for a correlation study, we're working with partners in Chicago, looking at how can we really make sure that there is this clear correlation between compostable packaging use and organic waste diversion and lower contamination. For our labeling guidelines and our comprehensive bill, we've been working with a lot of states on extended producer responsibility and making sure that compostable packaging is a part of that so that there's a good funding stream for compost infrastructure. We have labeling guidelines on our website. We're looking to consumer test those, make sure that they are really robust. For guiding principles on funding, we helped put together the Compost Act, which is a federal bill that would provide grants and loans for municipalities and private businesses to expand food scraps composting. And we've been working with the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee on 2 bills to better track composting and recycling programs and provide pilot funding. For field testing, this is one, does a product that broke down in the lab work in the real world? We just released a report of publicly available field testing data on our website, and we've set up a work item in ASTM to make sure we can standardize field testing and make sure that we're connecting the dots there. And then we're also working with the USDA on organic ag rules to make sure that compostable products and packaging in the future can be an accepted input. So I know that's a lot of information. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak here today, and I hope to be able to answer some questions. Feel free to email me or check us out on LinkedIn. Thank you very much.